Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. Welcome. Today is February 17th, Wednesday. This is an Ask Me Anything Facebook Live on the InfoMullet. I am Timothy Clancy, your Chief Mulleteer, and this is Bonky, the emotional support donkey and future star of a Bonky coin challenge coin, potentially. Great idea from the mulleteers as we were gathering before the show started. Again, as always, if you are watching this live, thank you very much for your support. Please like, follow, share. If you're watching this on YouTube, we put these up on YouTube, the full episode, the Friday after it happens, and then we break up each segment so you can watch just the segment you're interested in the following week. If you want to support the InfoMullet, we appreciate all the mulleteer supports. It allows us to do the coverage, work on the things we do. I'm really appreciative of that. You can go ahead and support us at www.patreon.com/InfoMullet. Only $5 a month is the support. There's a couple tiers in there. We have a lot of supporters on today, so we appreciate all the mulleteers. And let's go ahead and, as I mentioned earlier, today is going to start with some COVID-19 coverage, and then it's going to go rapidly into international affairs. I picked up a couple hundred followers during the impeachment proceedings and the trial proceedings. So if you came here seeing my domestic coverage, I actually am more of a specialized in international activities. So every first Wednesday of the month on the InfoMullet Ask Me Live, we focus on domestic U.S. issues. The third Wednesday, today, we focus on COVID-19 and international affairs. So today's, if you have questions on the impeachment and trial, feel free to ask them. But there's other things going on in the world that are still important. So we're going to try and focus on those today, and that's what I'd like to stay focused on. But to give you a preview of where we're going. This is today's roundup, again, starting with COVID-19, wins the race for the bomb, giving some context for the India farmer protests. There's been a lot of that. Myanmar coup started in February and is accelerating. It is still going on today, massive protest. Bit of a divergence then to look at the worldwide electricity usage of Bitcoin. That has come up as Tesla made a big investment in Bitcoin. It's generated a lot of renewed interest. Then we skip over to Russia with Say My Name Navalny versus Putin. And then, because what would some international affairs and instability be without something on Iraq? Well, there's stuff going on in Iraq too, so we'll jump back there. All of these links, if you're looking at this down in the Facebook, all the links are there. There's a lot of InfoMullet articles. If you go out to the InfoMullet blog, a lot of these are in an article form, so you can catch up on if you want a deeper context. But let's go ahead. And this is where you can find us. We're on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We have a store. Go grab some mullet gear if you want. And then, again, our Patreon. But here we go. So starting out with COVID-19, one of the things we talked about in December, we had an InfoMullet article. It's called The Strategic Risk of COVID-19. And I wanted to kind of set the context of what we mean by strategic risk. And I used this graphic in that article. Now, all of our COVID-19 articles now are being authored. Well, most of them, especially the recent ones, are authored by Science Decoded. So there's a Facebook page out there. This is an actual epidemiologist, virologist who works in a lab with COVID-19, is deep in the hands-on activities with vaccine and viruses. So he's Science Decoded is writing these articles. It gives a great technical perspective. I don't want you to think I'm the expert here to this level of detail. But these articles kind of give us down in the details. And what is displayed here is like the tactical risk versus the strategic risk. So on the left side, it's a picture of D-Day. This is the invasion in Normandy that begins the final offensive, pushing in through France and into Germany to defeat the Nazi threat. Now, when I say tactical, that's not diminishing everything that's going on in that picture in Normandy. You got to land all the boats. You got to have your strategy. We went through North Africa first, then we took out Italy. So there's a grand strategy here. But when I say tactical risk, what I mean is everything on the left, all the Normandy invasions, all the logistics, the army movements, the successful campaigns would be compromised if the strategic risk on the right materialized. And the strategic risk in World War II was that the Germans developed the atomic bomb in numbers before we did. I mean, counterfactual is that Germany gets 4 to 5 atomic bombs and can use them before we reach Berlin. Totally different outcome to the World War II. And in COVID-19, the tactical risk is everything we've been trying to do that I've been tracking on pandemic response. Our policies for masking, our ability to contact trace, test for positive cases, isolate those cases, take care of people, manage the numbers, and we haven't done well on the tactical risk whatsoever. It's been a really unfortunate how poorly we've done on the tactical risk. So we haven't done well. And the reason why it's a tactical risk is the strategic risk is that while we're focusing on all this, COVID-19 mutates like an atomic bomb to a version of COVID-19, that a variant that is now defeating the vaccines we've been working on. The only strategy that works in a pandemic like this, you develop vaccines, you deploy them widely, you reach herd immunity through vaccination, and then you defeat it. But the strategic risk is that COVID-19 mutates before we get there. And I'm sorry to say, well, we've hit that point. So let's walk through some of the technical stuff here. What do we mean by mutations and variations? So assume that there's a dartboard in like the world's biggest bar, or a conceptual bar. There's a dartboard hanging on the wall, and COVID-19 is some drunk, blindfolded guy throwing darts, right? What this represents is the dartboard is the risk area for these strategic risks to begin manifesting. And the darts are every mutation that happens with COVID-19. Now let's go through some terms. A mutation in COVID-19 is a change in the genetic code of an organism or the virus from what is the standard. So the original wild form of COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 has a form. A mutation just means a change. And every particle in your body, in anyone infected by COVID, could go through mutation. That's just a random change that happens. So these mutations are like darts. And if you think of the numbers, inside any one person is probably millions of COVID-19 particles. So each of these is a potential dart to mutate. And then you talk about hundreds of thousands or millions of people getting infected, and the course of those infections over time, that's billions upon billions of darts that you just handed to this drunk, blindfolded dart thrower. Now, he's not throwing with any accuracy, he's just throwing a lot of darts. And what you get is some of those darts are going to hit the dartboard board. And what these different words, if it hits the board at all, right, that's an isolate. An isolate is a virus with a unique, unobserved genetic code that's a unique pattern. It's different from the original, but it's no points, right? It's on the board, but it's no points. A variant is a viral isolate that is observed, and it's got one or specific mutations that make it more transmissible, more virulent, or both. So a lot of these things that have come out that we've heard about are variants. They still are affected by the vaccines we've created, but they're more viral. They can catch people more. It's easier to pass it on. They may be more virulent or lethal, that when you get it, you suffer more. If one of those darts hits that bullseye, though, that's a viral strain. A viral strain is an isolate that has a substantially different pattern of immune reactions to other patients. That means that the vaccines that we deploy, which are specifically designed to trigger the immune response, it no longer is effective at all, or it's reduced effectiveness. Now, you throw these darts in the billions of numbers, eventually one of them is going to hit that bullseye. And what happens when they hit the bullseye, you've got these. These are some of the detailed names. I'm going to go over these in a little bit clearer here. These are the detailed names of the variants that have emerged in COVID-19 over the last 6 months. And you can see a bunch of them are no points scored. Some of them have points, but a few have hit the bullseye. And when you hit the bullseye, COVID-19 wins the race for the bomb. So we have a situation right now where it's as if Germany got the bomb before we did, because we have now a variant, a new strain that has shown the ability to defeat current vaccines, and it is spreading. Now, I want to put this in context, and we'll explain this. This isn't like we've lost World War II, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, but it is a serious risk. So the strategic risk we talked about in December, congratulations, world, we've screwed it up enough. We've met it in February. And what these nuclear races, these are some of the variants that came out. Think of these like different countries racing for the bomb during World War II. We know the Soviets were working on it. We were working on it. Germany was working on it. You know, the 614 mutation, this is really the granddaddy of all the subsequent mutations, or we suspect it is. It came out in the summer of 2020. It's slightly more contagious, right? That's a variant. It's more contagious, but the vaccine still works against it. But because we didn't take COVID seriously and we didn't stop it, people got more and more infected. We handed more darts to that dart player who we just gave him billions of more darts, and boy, did he start throwing them. The fall winter wave 2 spike infected so many more people that it was only a matter of time before some of those darts started hitting the board. Now, we had a near miss, the cluster 5 FVI spike in fall of 2020. For those who watched the info mullet, Denmark, its entire mink population, there was a crossover mutation that went from humans to minks. They have a large mink farming industry there. They had to cull the entire mink farming industry, which is no small matter. This is a big industry in Denmark. They killed every single mink they had, and that mutation was made extinct. I mean, that's what you want to have with a mutation that's dangerous. It's extinct. Bad news for the minks, but they contained it. However, B117, this one is the one you've heard about associated with the United Kingdom, although it's broader than that. This one was identified in the fall, winter of 2020. It's substantially more contagious. I'll show here in a little bit the numbers. You can see how much more contagious this one is than the previous. It's still effective for our current vaccines, and this was the basis when we wrote that article, the tactical versus strategic risk. It was about B117. Well, here comes along B11351, December of 2020. This is substantially more contagious and reduces some of the vaccines. Congratulations, this is the bomb. B1351 is the atomic bomb. COVID has it, we don't. We lost the race to the bomb. Now, doesn't mean it's worldwide yet. We'll go over into the details yet, but this is what's driving the South Africa spike where it was first detected. They do a lot of sequencing there, so they caught it there first. We don't know if it originated there. Doesn't really matter. You have, again, we've handed the drunk billions of darts, and some of them are going to hit. So where it originates is less of a concern than that we gave them so many darts that it originated. Then B11248, this is at January of 2020. Just in the last month now, this is one that has been attributed to spikes in Brazil and Japan. It was first sequenced from a traveler coming from Brazil to Japan. It's similar to B1351, which means it's more contagious and could reduce some of the efficacy of the vaccine. So what are we talking about when we talk about what does it mean when one of these gets the bomb, right? Well, so the B1135, the B11, let me get this right here. The B117 is the United Kingdom one. The B11351 is the one that was identified in South Africa. So this one, in South Africa, they're mainly using AstraZeneca and Novavax. These are two vaccines. We're not using them here in the US. We're using Moderna and Pfizer. This thing took the Novavax efficacy and dropped it from an 80 to 85, 90%. It dropped it down to 50 to 60%. What that means is when you vaccinate 100 people, instead of 95 having immunity or 85, now only half have it. And it's basically ineffective at that point. You don't know who's really got immunity. It's not like you can really test it easily. So you vaccinate 100 people, but only half of them are good. It's an ineffective vaccine. AstraZeneca, they've halted the use of AstraZeneca in South Africa because of the risks of this virus that is now spreading there, this variant that is spreading. There's a new strain, and it appears to diminish the effectiveness. Now, unfortunately, it's not just these two vaccines that B1135 has reduced. It does appear to reduce the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that we are currently using, not down to half, but by some percentage point, which is still being determined out by research. This is so serious that Moderna has announced they are working on boosters to be able to you get the vaccine from Moderna, then you go back and get a booster, and it should help against this variant strain that's spreading. That's a whole nother this is why the strategic risk is you get the bomb. It's hard enough to vaccinate and get herd immunity in 330 million people in the US with everything that's going on. It's a logistical nightmare. Now you got to go back and get a booster, a third visit. This is really, really what's coming difficult. And these mutations aren't over. Just because COVID-19 got the bomb now, it doesn't mean it's done picking up bombs. So let me pause here, check real quick for questions, and then I'll go into sort of some of the more details of how this happens. Don't see any questions right now related to this. So if you got questions, go ahead and add them. No pun there, Adam Bomb. Add them to the Facebook Live. But so what particularly, like, we use this analogy of handing billions of darts to the blindfolded drunk bar player, and he hit a bullseye. Well, of course, causally, that's an analogy. Causally, the sheer causal mechanism that causes the most basic one is Every person who gets infected has millions of potential particles in them, COVID particles. Every single one of those particles has a chance to mutate. Every single mutation has a chance to mutate into an isolate, a variant, or a strain. And those are low probabilities, but as we got more and more people infected, anyone who plays a game, you start adding more and more dice to the pool, no matter how rare that probability is for a critical failure, it's going to come up unless it's me playing, and then it comes up all the time. But there's also been some specific things that have come up, what we call perfect storm circumstances. And this is research that's only come out. You can find it in the links on the InfoMullet article. There are certain patients who get COVID-19, and because they have a pre-existing immunocompromisation, their immune system's compromised for some existing reason, they do not kick COVID-19. It lives in them, and it's not that they have it dormant. They have an active, ongoing infection for months, and we give them the best medical care we can, which we should. And they can survive for months. They may die eventually, but during that time in their body, the COVID-19 is continuously mutating within the same host. This is a very unusual circumstance for a virus to be a continuous infection like this for months at a time. So those millions of particles in there are now in a multi-stage, and instead of being a random roll of the dice, it's like you're rolling the same set of dice and continuing to add on to it each time when it's in the same hoster. They're building off one another. Those mutations that are coming are combining and that creates the perfect storm conditions. Now, this isn't to say we should stop supporting immunocompromised patients, but we need to be very careful about how they're isolated, because what's happened is it's believed that some of these perfect storm circumstances, the virus then transmitted from the infected patient who was infected for months at a time. You have exhausted workers, you have PPP struggles, you have a crush of patients. It escapes and transmits and re-enters the community, and that's where you get some of these variant and strains. Some of it may just be lucky dart throwing, but where does that leave us in terms of where are we facing this? Yeah, I'm seeing some good comments here. We'll get to them in a second when we talk about how we contain the bomb. So let me share here. So this is a map right now of where the virus has spread for B117. Again, this is the one that was identified in the UK, caused a large spike in the UK. It's not defeating the vaccine. It's simply far more contagious. You can see it's really prevalent. And this is not a per capita. This is just a number of established cases. We don't have a lot of sequencing capacity, so this isn't like, it could be much more widespread, but we found them in this, and we find a cluster in California and Florida, both of which have had huge spikes in coronavirus. Part of it may be this B117 variant that's existing there. The B1351, right now, these charts are as of this morning. So there's the CDC websites if you want to check yourself. The links are below. The B1351 has not been seen as widely, but it has showed up. Texas, California, the mid-Atlantic. So the bomb is here. We don't know to what extent it's going to spread, but we have found evidence of it. And that means that if this continues to, with the current outbreak, if it continues to spread and gain traction, we may have shot ourselves in the foot with our vaccine as we drive that. So let's take a look now on where we're at in the, here we go. So I'm going to show some charts here which show there we go. So for those who have seen this before, all right. So this is our Waldron data, COVID cases. This is cases per million, and I picked a couple countries here. You've got United States, United Kingdom, Germany, South Africa, Canada, and Sweden. You can begin if you zoom past the time here. Again, these are 7-day rolling average confirmed cases per million people. So it's all population adjusted. You can see here the massive spikes as we go in here, let's say December, right? Let's move forward. So we're just looking at, this was wave 2 was accelerating, and you can see this United Kingdom, it actually drops going into December 6th. And then this is that spike that's attributed to B117. And this is, it was kind of detected here around Christmas is when they detected it, massive spike. Same thing with South Africa. You can see South Africa, much lower spike, and this is being attributed to the B1351, massive spike, drops almost in the same pattern in time. In fact, a lot of these are, it's because of the Christmas holiday break that these 7-day rolling averages, because it's averaging, it looks like they all happen at the same time, but it's because the infections that occurred during Christmas break were being recognized here, and then it begins tapering off, and you see the decline. Now, this is good. The decline is good. Well, Sweden's struggling. Sweden's kind of flatline. But again, when we look at waves, we don't want to just look at the number of cases per capita, but we can look at the biweekly change. And what you see here is on the percent here, this is the percent of biweekly change. A positive percent means accelerating, negative percent means declining or decelerating. So when we look at this gives you a heads up, and you can see here this spike, and it's hard to read because you can see here in Sweden, Sweden and the United States and all that drive some really hard numbers. So let's zoom it in more, get it just in that last month here. You can see again the United Kingdom spike and the South Africa spike in terms of percent of changes. Massive spikes, way more than this is the manifestation of the B117 and the B1351. Just purely the contagiousness of this is demonstrated by these massive increases. And so you can see we're declining. Here's our post-Christmas spike. Congratulations, everyone. Way to screw it up. We get a post-Christmas spike. And now everyone is declining again, except for poor Sweden. Alas, poor Sweden. I don't, who knows what they're doing now, but they've had a minor increase. But again, this is all below zero, so it's negative, it's declining. This doesn't mean we're out of the woods, because if you look at this as just a cumulative, it becomes, excuse me, 7-day rolling average. Here we go. You can see here the spikes. You can see if you go back and look over time, this is the more traditional view that people may be more familiar with, which is just a pure number of cases, 7-day rolling average. You can see here wave 1, and then it drops, and then we get wave 1.5, and then this is where South Africa gets its first wave. Then we drop, everyone drops, then wave 2 hits. And you can see that even though we're dropping, this is important, even though we're dropping so significantly, we were so high to begin with, we're still higher. We're at 85,000 cases on average per over 7-day average now. That's higher than the peak over the summer, which was 65,000 cases a day. So the lull of wave 2 is still higher than the peak of wave 1.5 and much higher than the peak of wave 1. Now you see this also in confirmed deaths. Confirmed deaths, obviously first wave, no one was ready for it, so it was a little bit higher here than in wave 1.5. And then you get this spike here in the US. Again, we are just now dropping 2,100 deaths on a 7-day rolling average versus our peak in March. So we're just now dropping beneath the peak of the first wave. And, this is just total numbers. If you do it population adjusted, it shows a little bit different. It shows how the United Kingdom and South Africa, because of that spike, what the spike does is, even if the virus itself is not more virulent, it's not more lethal in nature, if it's more contagious, that has a feedback effect. More people get it, more people go to the hospital, more resources are taken up in the hospital, they have less spare capacity. When they run out of capacity, I don't care even if the virus is the same virulence as it was at the beginning, if you go in with a severe or critical case and they run out of hospital capacity, your chances of dying go way up. So that's why you see the death spikes here. Here is the same data. So that is where we're at. And so we have a possibility to cut this off as we have a declining wave 2. But to do that, it's kind of like containing a bomb. The bomb's already out, right? It's loose in the environment. Well, how do we contain it? First of all, you have to reduce total daily infections. And it's not just reducing it to 60,000 a day. Yeah, congrats, only 60,000 a day times million of particles in each person. That's not going to do it. You really need to get numbers down to near zero. You're talking New Zealand level numbers, or at least South Korea numbers, which are, a couple hundred a day or a couple dozen a day. We have to do that. We don't get out of this by ignoring that, because think of this, every time these vaccines that we create them and we say, we'll go back to normal, we have a vaccine. Well, COVID could make a new bomb, right? As long as it goes around in us, it's going to stick with us. So we have to get those down to the point where it stops. We got to stop giving darts to the dart player, right? That's the first thing. The second is we need to do load balancing of healthcare services. Now, I've talked about this for months, going back to the beginning. We were originally talking between the states, but we can't just think about this parochially as our country and their country, or this country and that country. The pandemic is worldwide, and as long as COVID-19 exists anywhere, its risk is everywhere. So we could be doing great ourselves, not that we are, but let's say we're doing great, and someplace in Europe or Asia or South America struggles, and a new variant crops up there that defeats our vaccine and bypasses it. Well, we're not immune to that. That's going to come back and get us. So we have to load balance healthcare services internationally. We didn't win World War II by going at it alone. We had an international cooperation between major powers. We coordinated. We did it. Anytime you've got a truly global crisis, you have to have better international coordination than what we've seen. You can't do it without. We need to make sure that we're doing minimizing those perfect storm conditions, which means that we need to have, for those who are immunocompromised, we need to identify them quickly, give them all the support they need and the medical care they need, but also make sure that the transmission out of that perfect storm isn't introducing new variants. We obviously continue developing and updating vaccines, but that only goes so far. You can't, that's going to be, everyone's going to say, well, we got a new vaccine and we got a new booster. It's logistically complicated. Pretty soon, you think you have COVID fatigue? Wait until we start having vaccine fatigue. Oh, I got my shot a year ago and I don't want to get a booster because it's blah, blah, blah. Well, you can't keep changing the vaccine and expecting that not to happen. So yes, getting new vaccines, getting boosters, that's good. But we need to improve our testing, contact tracing, and getting, when we get down to that, so that we're not allowing these new outbreaks to happen. And part of that is sequencing. We haven't talked about sequencing a whole lot because it's all been about testing, find who's positive. But sequencing is like, what particular variant or strain of COVID does a person have? One reason B.1.351 was discovered in South Africa is they sequence a lot more of their samples than we do. So it may have originated here, it may have originated in the UK. We don't know. The place that it was first identified was in South Africa. So we need to sequence a lot more of our samples to find out what variants are going around in the country so we can better prepare and plan. We need to improve our, public health interventions. Someone was talking about masking, or Charles was talking about masking earlier. It includes, but not as limited to, mask mandates, capacity limits, venue closures, all these things, public school closures. People want to get back to normal, but the need to get back to normal has meant ignoring the war we were fighting and allowing the enemy to win. You cannot win a war by ignoring it and then thinking it will just go away and you'll be back to normal. We have to treat this like the serious threat it is, and put in place the measures and find innovative ways to make sure that we're not compromising other healthcare outcomes by just using ham-fisted things that we maybe, Germany has been doing these closures for now. They've got a lot more sophisticated ways of balancing public schools. Canada's schools are open, but a lot of other things are shut down because they're balancing those R factors. We in the US, we want our bars, we want our schools, we want our music venues, we want to go outside, we want to ignore this. Well, if you don't make trade-off choices, you're not going to get ahead. You got to figure out what your priorities are. So if we want to open schools, that means other things have to be shut down as we're playing with that R factor value and getting it beneath that R1 of replication. And then again, we're going to have to get the sequencing under control. So let me pause here and see if there's a question. Yeah, it would be great if there was an easier way to deploy the vaccine. Mike Morrison's putting a good point here. Like you could do it, you could spray it for mosquitoes, or you could put it in the water like fluoride. I would love to think that maybe Science Decoded can take, if that's even a technology on the horizon. I don't think it is. Sounds new to me. Yeah, people are comparing the U.S. to Sweden, saying leave Sweden alone. Ed's saying, hey, teacher, leave those Swedes alone. Great Twisted Sister reference there. So the fall right now, the part of the way to collapse is, I wouldn't say it's like brilliant. Like, there's things in war that you could say, hey, look at Patton. He knows what he's doing. He's a successful general. He's commanding. He's doing successful things. I don't think we can credit the collapse of wave 2 to that. I think we can credit it to the lack of major events like Thanksgiving, like Christmas, where everyone goes out and travels and gets around. But guess what's coming up? People have mentioned other things. Hey, look, it's Oh, I'm getting corrected. It was Pink Floyd, not Twisted Sister. Well, Twisted Sister's better than Pink Floyd on any day of the week. Just, take it for what it is. I think I just gained a lot more hated, and I can feel my reviews going down. What was it, Twisted Sister? Didn't they say something about leave those kids alone or something? Or, we're not going to take it? I don't know. Something with kids and things. Great. I do thousands of hours of Infomullet references, nail every single one. I screw up 2 bands, and now the comments are going like you wouldn't believe. So if I could but let's switch to something I know as opposed to pop music from the 70s. If there's any more questions on COVID-19, again, we've got to take it seriously with the bomb going on. It's not going to get back to normal. My forecast for 2021 is we're not under new normal until 2022 at least, and this seems to confirm that. So, question. Is it possible that a variant could evolve that could affect children the way it currently affects adults now? That's a better question for Science Decoded. I would certainly say it's within the realm of possibility. These are all characteristics that are basically like values, and the current value of COVID may have less impact on kids in the short term, although we're still doing research on the long-term impacts. But one of those value changes, it could impact kids. This is why I call it the strategic risk. Everything we do is based on what we know of the virus. And since it's a novel virus, we started out not knowing much. We've learned a lot, but if we allow it to mutate into a strain that defeats our vaccines and has other characteristics of contagiousness or virulence, some of those may be more harmful to kids. That's I think it's a real risk, but I hope Science Decoded to answer that. Yeah, Science Decoded has now arrived. Give some love to Science Decoded. He has arrived on it. We're just ending up the COVID-19. Valeria is asking more info on new normal. So the new normal is, I think we continue to roll out the vaccine. So vaccine deployment is accelerating everywhere, but the problem is the vaccines that we're deploying are built off the wild or original COVID-19 strain. We think that vaccine is effective against every other variant, B.1.1.7, all those other things that are more contagious. The vaccine is still good for that. But B.1.351 and what was that other one? B.1.1.248. Those ones, the B.1.351, we see that it's knocked back the Novavax and the AstraZeneca vaccine and has reduced the efficacy of the Moderna and Pfizer. The research is still out yet. Even if there was none of these variants, we would have struggled to get back to normal in 2021 just because of the logistical challenge of these variants or the vaccines. Adding in these new variants, I think we're looking at mid 2022, maybe even late 2022. I mean, this is one of the things that we take for granted, the privilege that we haven't been faced in our lifetimes with the Terminators type situation. It cannot be negotiated with. It cannot be dealt with. You have to just beat it. And past generations have faced these. They have faced sequences of pandemics that show up every single year and cull the population. We may be living with that for a very long time if we don't get our act together. Now, over time, people will begin to realize this is much more like smallpox or polio. It's not just a flash in the pan, and hopefully you'll see that adoption, but it could take a lot longer if we don't get our act together. And again, we can't just beat it in the United States or Canada or Germany. We have to beat it worldwide. These variants can occur anywhere, and if they occur anywhere, they can impact everywhere. So the challenge we face now is we have to have global coordination to reduce the infections, put in a vaccine, get it in place, have a vaccine uptake enough that creates that vaccine-created herd immunity, and then we'll be able to get back to new normal. Oh, and science is adding a new one to the list. Last night, B.1.5.2.5 observed also in England. Mini Spanish flu in England right now due to the quality of genomic surveillance in the UK. So, wow. So that was good news. Thanks, Science Decoded. Thanks for showing up. Give us another piece of bad news. Looks like there's a new variant, B.1.5.2.5, cropping up in England. And again, these things are replicating off themselves. So so that's a lot of horrible news. And let's switch to something that's, oops, I just reduced my Zoom. So let's take a pause here while I figure out how, I just hotkeyed away my Zoom interface, so I don't know how to resume it. That's annoying when you hit go to meeting. Does anyone know how to restore the Zoom control? Always show meeting control bar. Floating meeting controls, Control H. There we go. They're back. Okay, good. Whew. So we're back. Let's take a pause here to pump the Infomullet. If you haven't yet, check it out, www.patreon.com/Infomullet. We can definitely use your support. All this information that we get and provide, we appreciate our muleteers. We appreciate all the support. If you want to check out the store link is below. You've got t-shirts, mugs, masks, everything you need to, apparently the new normal is going on for a while. Yeah, so the next topic of fun and joy is Myanmar, is India, actually. The India farmer protest. So, all right, let's pause here and go. Leaving COVID, going to international affairs. In India, the context on this is important because it goes a lot. And one way to think of the India protest is it's 10% economics, 20% religion, and 70% politics. So the economics is that India gained independence in 1947, and it's one of the few countries that actually went full on into socialism for practices in the 1970s. It even went into the Constitution in 1976. They actually adopted socialist practices, state level planning, where the state determined all these things. Sweden was the other one that I know of that actually implemented full on socialism. Both of them ended up abandoning it for various reasons. India began to struggle in the 1980s. They had some stagnation and general dislike of socialism, and they ended up abandoning in the 1990s. But one sector that remained very state controlled and heavily controlled was the farming sector, the agricultural sector. You've got minimum price supports. You've got regulations, not just between foreign countries in India, but literally between districts, like protectionist tariff and things to protect local farmers within India in the districts. It's got continuing to have very small plots. So the traditional farm in the US right now is a megacorp. It is a giant farm, typically managed by a corporation or a business or a family that owns a business. It has adopted tons of technology and infrastructure because of the green revolution. It has the size to do that. It has economy of scale. In India, the plots continue to be very small, and it's enough to support a farmer and their family, but it's not a very efficient way of producing food. And some of these are doing pretty well. Some of them are within 90% of the global average, but some of these plots are a third or less of the productivity. So what it means is you have a lot of little small farmers producing just a little bit of food. They form into these cooperatives and unions, which is one way of they distribute it, but they also struggle with the distribution because of these interstate and interdistrict regulations. You can't sell your milk here because we only buy milk locally from. Imagine if the US, you couldn't buy Texas milk in Georgia, or even in Georgia, you couldn't buy South Georgia milk if you were in North Georgia. That's the kind of interstate regulations that's a holdover. The infrastructure of India, of course, it has very poor transportation in a lot of areas. They don't have a lot of technical infrastructure, refrigeration. They estimate a third, so they're producing less food, and then about a third of all that food goes to waste before it's marketed. And this is not. Oh, the final thing is the government tends to play politics with farming. Like many countries, the farmer base has been one that's been played political football with. They tend to come out with rapid changes, and we're going to talk about that in a sec as we get into political. But no one disagrees that there's a problem with India farming. But what's happened is a couple years ago, 2 states deregulated their markets, basically broke down the inner district barriers within those states within India, and they weren't able to get very far because they're just 2 states within a massive area within India. This was used as a pretext for 3 laws passed by Parliament in September. One expands the scope of trade that farmers, it's basically creating a free trade zone within India so farmers' food can go wherever it's needed. These interstate barriers go away. It reduces the layers of there's a sort of a farmers empowerment and protection. Don't trust these words, to be honest, right? When they say farmer empowerment and protection, you'll see soon that the farmers may not agree with that, but that's what it's called. They have a dispute settlement mechanism. Very key to that is that you can no longer take these folks to court. It's kind of like being forced arbitration. And then essential commodities allows for the center to regulate certain food items. And it really cuts out this MSP, this minimum support price. The MSP has traditionally been used as indicative. which means it's like an index. Like we used chain CPI for certain laws. You take the chain CPI number, you use that index for certain supports, but it has also at times been used as an actual floor where they say you cannot sell your produce beneath this rate, and that has a market distorting effect. So these three laws were there was no consultation done on this. This is where it gets political. There was no consultation done on these laws. There was no period for comment. There were no, when you liberalize a market like this, even if it's needed, there's going to be winners and losers. And what you want to do is balance the liberalization of the market with free market things, with protections and subsidies and support for those who are going to be hurt. Otherwise, you're not going to be the support. And this is where it changes from economics to political. And as I said, it's only 10% economics. The vast majority of it's political. So a quick political rundown on India. You've got two major parties that you're thinking about right now. One is the Indian National Congress. The other is the BJP, which is the, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. Since independence in 1947, India has been dominated by the Indian National Congress. You think about Gandhi, right? Everyone knows about Gandhi and the role he played in gaining independence. Well, the socialization of India was a lot of the Gandhi's descendants. There was a legacy of prime ministers, sort of a dynastic cycle of prime ministers from that family over India. And Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, his granddaughter, was the prime minister for 1966 through 1977, then again through 1980 through her assassination in 1984. And this is when these socialization procedures were put in place. They were put in place. Again, the liberalization of the markets began in 1990s after collapse of the Soviet Union. There was a currency crisis. Again, the Indian National Congress is still largely in control. Vajpayee, Prime Minister Vajpayee, appoints a reformer, Manmohan Singh, and they begin liberalizing it 1999 through 2004. The BJP comes in again. And then what you have is you have this interesting analogy, which for US listeners, I'm going to kind of use an analogy that's not perfect, but it's kind of like Obama versus Trump. You have Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He's Indian National Congress. Think of him like a Democrat. He's Sikh religion, and he is the prime minister from 2004 to 2014. Very much in the Obama meld. He's a technocrat. He's a very cold, detailed, noted for precision, stuff like that. Obviously, all politicians have controversial policies. I'm not trying to say they're immune for that, but that's the style of Prime Minister Singh. In 2014, as part of the populist wave that was spreading around the world, Prime Minister Narendra Modi takes power, 2014. This is much more like a Trump personality. He's an advocate of Hindutva, which is the uber nationalist, Hindu nationalist movement within India. This is a very chauvinistic movement. It puts Hinduism first and foremost. It's kind of like Make America Great Again. It's like make India as a Hindu nation great again, is Prime Minister Modi. And you can kind of see this farming issue sort of like immigration between President Obama and President Trump. Everyone agrees it's a problem. No one is like, hey, there's not a problem with agriculture, just like everyone's like, okay, it's one of these long-standing things. But you go from the technocratic fix of President Obama to the we're going to jam stuff through and build a wall and just do this with President Trump. And again, that gets a lot of support from the nationalist folks who are like, we're just going to do it. So the BJP puts forth these laws and just jams them through in September of 2020. They bypassed normal procedures, claiming the COVID-19. They put in no offsetting things. It was literally like a forced thing. And this led to it's kind of like, hey, we're going to build a wall, and regardless of what you say, we're going to build it, and we're not going to take any input. We're just going to do it. That's kind of what the style is of Prime Minister Modi. Now, I called mass instability for India in 2020, which happened a little bit, but the conditions are ripe for mass instability. And I was more worried about, earlier Prime Minister Modi passed this Citizen Amendment Act that defined who could be a citizen if you were immigrating into the country, and gave higher standing if you were of certain religions, but not Muslim. Again, 20% religion here. The Hindutva movement under Prime Minister Modi is extremely against certain religions, Sikh, Muslim religions, things like that. And you're seeing that play out here. So the farmers begin protesting this in September, right? They see this coming down. And again, no one's saying that this is wrong, but they're like, you didn't ask us. We don't have any offsetting support mechanisms. This is just going to be like a brutal free market program with no supports or transition periods or anything like that. And farmers traditionally play a large protest role in India. During the 1980s, when electricity prices really high, they literally shut New Delhi down with protest until they got subsidies and support for electricity. And they have a history of protesting. Whenever you have major protest, you're going to begin to have a political alignment between the two powers. So as the farmers, it's a wide, diverse group, they begin protesting. You begin to see the Indian National Congress, which opposes the BJP, take the side of the the farmers. The Prime Minister Modi and his party, the BJP, begins to use, they don't like argue the merits of the case. They just begin using more and more authoritarian measures. They do repression of free speech. They break up assemblies. So, of course, you get into this dictator's dilemma we've talked about, where the protests get more activist, innovative. They start using tractors to cause traffic jams. They have camp sit-ins. They actually block certain cities with tractors to shut down the traffic. In retaliation, the authorities put in spike strips. They do arrest. There's some violence. They begin using sedition charges against journalists. They begin blocking social media. And then it all comes to a hit. Why this has taken off now and really becoming combustible is January 26th is the Republic Day in India. And that's the day under which, remember, they gained their independence in 1947, but their first constitution was in 1950. So think about the Republic Day is kind of like being our July 4th, right? For our Declaration of Independence, that's the key day. It's a key national holiday where they celebrate the framing of this Constitution, right? In 1950, January 26th. And there's a specific place called the Red Fort, which would be like the Liberty Bell from us. The Red Fort is where the first Prime Minister of India, Nehru, in 1947 at this Red Fort, it's a historical fort, it's been around for a few hundred years, he raised the national flag of India, and that was a symbolic mark of its independence. So 1947, they raised the flag over the Red Fort, and then in 1950, January 26th, they get their constitution. These are key patriotic days, and one of the things that Hindu Vatas are very keen on is patriotism, right? They're very much nationalistic. These are important days. So of course the farmers say, we're going to target your Republic Day. You know, that's your soft point. We're going right for it. So these protests happen on January 26th nationwide. And everyone knew this was going to happen. It didn't surprise anyone. But what did surprise people is that there was a contingent that broke into the Red Fort. This is like breaking into Liberty Hall, where the bell is. They climbed the dome and they hoisted what's called the Nishan Shahib flag, which I hope I'm getting that right. This is a Sikh religious flag, and it has a wide use by lots of people, but it's a distinctly religious flag, and it is distinctly not Hindu, and it's been raised over this would be like Antifa raising the black bloc flag over the Alamo, right? It would really not be taken well. And it's associated with what's called the Khalistan movement. And the Khalistan movement is literally a separatist Sikh movement. And so this was not the intention of the farmers, right? This was obviously a group within it taking advantage of the situations to promote separatism and tweak. And the authorities absolutely went nuts over this. They took it like I said, it'd be like putting a MAGA flag or a Trump flag over, the Democratic National Convention or something like that. It'd be like putting an Antifa or black bloc flag over the Alamo, maybe. You can pick whatever analogy you want. It's really a tweak in the nose. And what happened is some of the farmers unions actually broke off from the protest at that point. They're like, that's not what we're about. We're not making this religious, because religious is a very combustible material in India. But since then, these protests are continue, and and you can read about it going on. They've actually started blocking Twitter users. This is when Rihanna and Greta Thunberg, and you get more of the Western attention as these protests really now metastasize into these much more combustible protests in India. So that's some of the context of what's going on in India. Yeah, so some people, so quick pause here. Some people are talking about Texas. It's not a domestic one, so I won't get into that much, other than it's relevant to this Bitcoin thing on electricity. My understanding of the Texas issue is that all sorts of things froze, all sorts of different powers froze. The infrastructure in Texas is not prepared for this kind of cold weather. When you're dealing with crisis management, you make economic decisions to say, what kind of crisis are we going to prepare for? So in Georgia, you spend a lot of infrastructure on tornadoes, tornado sirens, weather stations, all sorts of things to prepare for tornadoes. You don't prepare for snowstorms because you don't get them much. In Boston, yeah, you prepare for snowstorms, not so much for tornadoes. My understanding of the Texas situation is the primary cause is that as an economic choice, they did not invest their infrastructure in extreme cold weather protection. So you had failure and freezing of coal, natural gas, windmills. The windmills have drawn a lot of the attention because people can kind of say, haha, windmills froze. But really, if you look at it, I think there's more natural gas that's frozen, but it's the energy sector across the board. The entire energy sector was not prepared. So you have a reduction in power right as people need more usage, the usage is spike. And Texas has a unique grid. The rest of the US is split between 3 grids that are interconnected, and you can draw power from different areas. So if one area is causing, has a low power, you can redirect power from another area. Now, in the past, that has caused some problems. And Texas was kind of proud of its independent network because it was immune to these kind of interstate transfers. You think about the energy crisis in California and the exorbitant fees they were paying. That's because they were getting charged for these transfers. And Texas was like, ha, 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 we're independent. We have our own power grid. Well, the problem now is that power grid cannot draw power in as they lose the capacity from the cold weather. So, yeah, so going back to India, that little segue into Texas, Valeria is saying Canada came out as pro-farmer, India is pissed at us. Yeah, so it's key to know that very much this comparison between sort of Hindu Vata, Uber nationalism under Prime Minister Modi is very similar to the Make America Great movement under Trump. They are very hostile to any criticism. And so because they have the power, if you come out and say something against them, they come after you. And Canada did it. Rihanna did it. Yeah. And so the little discussion about Texas, I'll let that continue. But that's what's going on with India. Now, a near neighbor of India, let's pause here and share over to, where's my map? Here we go. A near neighbor of India is Myanmar, right? So let me close this. For those who don't know, a little quick geography lesson. Here's China, right? Here's India. We were just talking about India. Oh, there we go. China, India, Taiwan, South China Sea, we've talked a lot about over here on the right, Philippines. Right here in between is Myanmar. And it's important to note that it's a little confusing because you see Bangladesh here. India actually wraps around Bangladesh. So Myanmar shares a border with India and China, which means it's a very strategic place between those two countries. And Myanmar gained its independence the year after. It was also a British colony. It was called Burma at one point, which is why you'll hear a lot of people refer to it still as Burma. But it gained its independence just after India in 1948. The first prime minister was Aung San, so keep that name in mind. The military took over as a caretaker. I'm using finger quotes, caretaker in 1950s. They never really gave up power. So basically the military continued from the 1950s on, and then in the 1990s, the military said, hey, you know, we'll have a pathway to democracy. Go ahead, give it a try, see how it goes. And Aung San's daughter, which is Aung San Suu Kyi, became a political activist in the 1990s for what's called the National League of Democracy Party, the NLDP. They won elections. Hey, we're democracy. We have elections. We won the elections. The military's like, haha, just kidding. They refused to yield power. They put Suu Kyi under house arrest. And then Than Sui, a military dictator, takes over, and what's called the junta rises. So the junta is a collection of military leaders with one or a few in it. It's a small council of military leaders. And the junta ruled basically like a military dictatorship in 2011. 2011, the military says, hey, old is new, everything's fresh again. They put another roadmap to democracy down, right? And they were going to say in 2015, we'll have partial elections. And I say partial because half of the seats in parliament were still held by the military. The military still held a lot of statutory power. It was kind of like a test to see. They also created, this is important, a political party called the Union Solidarity and Development Party, the USDP. This is a front for the military. So the military has its own political party now, the USDP. And in the 2015 elections, Aung San Suu Kyi was released, and she won the presidency. The NLDP won seats in the parliament, but she's still very constrained by the military. And if people remember, she won the Nobel Peace Prize because she was sort of like a Nelson Mandela figure, under arrest for decades, finally released, now becomes the leader of the country, going to set a new path. Unfortunately, fairly disappointing. It turns out that Aung San is sort of a politician's politician, and she's made no bones about this. She goes, I was a politician when I was arrested. I stayed a politician while I was in house arrest. When I was released, I became a politician. And as a politician, she cut deals with the military. That's what kept her in power. And some of these deals, you know, we've talked about in the past, the Rohingya ethnic cleansing and genocide, that happened under her watch. Now, it was perpetrated by a military commander, MYNAMAR. I'm trying to get that, hope I get that name close. He was the military general that was in charge of operations, but Suu Kyi did not really protest it that strongly, even though she had some opportunities, and was largely seen as giving a free rein for the military to suppress and oppress the Rohingya, which created a huge refugee crisis. And some people have categorized, rightfully so, I think, as both ethnic cleansing and genocide. So that was a few years ago. Now the pathway to democracy has a larger general election in November 2020. And this is important because the Constitution at this point gives the president the unilateral ability to pick the commander-in-chief of the army. Remember, the military has been the dominant force in Myanmar for decades. So who runs this military is hugely important. And this would be, for the first time, put it under civilian control. The president gets to pick who leads the military. Well, I assume the military thought the USDP was going to win, but it didn't work out that way. So in the election, the NLDP won 396 out of 476 seats. So they won a clear majority, and the USDP only won 133. Well, guess what? Now Suu Kyi is the president. She gets to pick the commander-in-chief. Why does this matter? Because the current commander-in-chief, good old MYNAMAR, who suppressed the Rohingya, he's the commander-in-chief. By the Constitution, he is forced to retire when he hits age 65 in July of 2021. So if you're the military, you thought you were going to win these elections. I don't know why they thought that. They probably could have used some better pollsters, maybe get some 538 up in there, but they thought they were going to win. They didn't win. And now they're facing that someone else is going to pick their leader in July. And they begin saying, and stop me when this sounds familiar, the election's fraud. It was rigged. The whole thing's bogus. And so they make these huge claims, completely unsupported by any observers or any evidence, that the whole thing was rigged and flagged. And of course, everyone sees a coup is coming. And we talked about a coup. January 6th was not a coup. A coup is when the lawful military uses its authority and powers in an unlawful way to seize certain key institutions and literally take control. And that's what happened on February 1st. They did mass arrests of the political opposition. They used some trumped up charges. These charges are ridiculous. Suu Kyi herself was arrested. I'm not making this up. Unlicensed walkie-talkies for her security team. So they raided her house, and during the raid, they found walkie-talkies that they're claiming didn't have the right import stamp on them, or were for some outside external foreign country. They weren't licensed, and she got arrested for that. Another one of her deputies, again, I'm not making these charges up. It was illegal during COVID-19 to campaign politically. And this was the military's attempt to try and keep the opposition from winning the seats. Didn't work. So they charge one of the deputies with waving at a military convoy as it goes by and says, aha, you were politically campaigning. That was prohibited. You're now under arrest. So these arrests are completely bogus. And what's happened is the opposition, they may have thought that this would not have sparked opposition. They were very, very wrong. You know, I often talk about the dictator's dilemma, which is an asymmetric way, and we'll talk about it with Russia here in a bit if we get to it. I may not be able to get to it given the time, but this is not a dictator's dilemma. What's going on right now in Myanmar is a conventional force opposition. It is a mass mobilization of hundreds of thousands of people matching force with force. They are not trying to use a small group of people to punch above their weight and provide more problems. They are literally applying the entire force of society against this military. So you've got a general strike that's been called. They've got mass mobilization. They're boycotting purchasing anything from the junta. Now remember, the junta isn't just, it's a military, but over time they've created these economic conglomerates which sell products and have other things just like businesses. So there's now a mass boycott to cut off the money. They've done vehicle breakdown campaigns. You can see pictures of it on the internet. You go out and there's like 15 vehicles. They all have their hoods up and they're like, my car broke down or I'm out of gas, along with these other 20 cars right in this intersection. And of course, it's kind of like an impromptu barricade like they used in the revolutions of 1848 or 1830 or anything like that, barricades in the street. This is an impromptu barricade. It prevents transport. You got to deal with those vehicles. It creates a lot of, and they're having protests drawing hundreds of thousands of people. This is a mass movement. Now, the military didn't take this sitting down. They put in place martial law. They suspended all fundamental rights. They shut down the media. They blacked out the internet. So we're not getting a lot of news. And one reason I was watching is that literally today on the 17th was supposed to be the largest protest of the, and I'll put this back up on the map. The largest protest to date was supposed to happen in Yangon down here, and was supposed to be several 100,000 people. Before this protest happened, the military was deploying tanks, machine guns, all sorts of heavy weaponry. There is a real concern that a Tiananmen Square style crackdown, brutal military crackdown is going to happen at any time. So a lot of us were hitting page refresh. It's now about 2 a.m. in the evening. So the day's passed. And I don't know the current circumstance. It's hard to find out. It doesn't appear there was a crackdown today, but we may find out later, or it may be coming. But there was this massive protest, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. This is none of these things, the Indian protest or this, none of these things are complete and done. They're all in progress. So let me go see if there's any questions real quick. Yeah, we knew it was coming for the, no one was surprised by this coup. Myanmar has been ruled by the military for so long that no one was surprised. What will be interesting to see is if the mass mobilization and conventional force-on-force approach to mass resistance is able to break the military power, or whether they're able to reassert military power, and what kind of violence is involved in it. Morrison asked, any word on China infrastructure investments, Belt and Road? So what Mike is talking about here in Myanmar is that, again, let's take a look at the geography. So you actually have, here's Myanmar, here's China, right? China's right next door. They are very strategic partners. So there's been a ton of investment over the years in military. Because of sanctions and things like that, most of the military gear that the Myanmar military relies upon comes from China. They've also done a lot of economic investments, this Belt and Road. It's civil infrastructure investments. And there has been some conflict with China. Along these borders, in addition to the Rohingya, along these borders are Chinese separatists that have had conflict, and some of them are believed to be supported by the Chinese government. So China is kind of playing both sides of the coin here. They support the dictatorship in Myanmar with military and civic investment, but they also support some anti-government separatists along the border here, which causes problems. And what Mike's talking about, the Belt and Road, is what's called a debt trap. And a debt trap is, it's a very sophisticated diplomatic move, but it's, you can threaten your neighbors with weapons, and that's so 20th century. What China does is it does a lot of infrastructure by giving out loans, and then the debt that's needed to service those loans ends up being held by China. And so Myanmar becomes, in a way, financially dependent on China. It's a way of exerting soft power influence to maintain control. Because remember, China's strategic interest here, they have a huge strategic interest in the South China Sea, but they also have an interest here in what's going on in the Bay of Bengal and India. And right now, Japan, Australia, and India have signed a defense alliance against China. So you're talking about some strategic maneuvers that China wants to be the regional hegemon in. It's borders India, it borders these ones. It wants to project a sphere of influence around this entire region. It doesn't need to be global, but it wants to be a regional hegemon. And to do that, they don't need to just secure the South China Sea, but they want to make sure that they have they have checked India, and one way to do that is to maintain leverage over Myanmar. Now Myanmar has gone a little bit closer to India in recent years, and there's been some cooperation here along this border. So it's a complex situation. It's not just one or the other, but this belt and roads development that Mike's talking about is some of the civic infrastructure investment that Myanmar is putting in that creates this debt trap that Myanmar now may financially dependent on India. So hopefully everyone's back, had a good break. That was just some follow-up questions from the Myanmar. Let's jump over a little bit, change of pace to Bitcoin. And this actually if you go up on my Facebook for the Infomult, there's a review that's none too kind by a Tom Nancy. And the backstory on that is why I'm doing this Bitcoin piece today. So I was just browsing Facebook, innocently wandering my way. You know me, I never get in any fights. I never get in any okay. So I got onto an argument with somebody, my bad. It was about Bitcoin and electricity consumption. And this guy was a Bitcoin pumper. He was like, somewhere between the pedestrianness of a YouTube, watch my video and you'll make millions, and the obnoxiousness of grow your penis from home and it will change your life forever email. That's what this guy was doing in a thread. He's like, Bitcoin's awesome. There's nothing wrong with it. If you disagree with it, you're a silver shill. It's going to 120,000. And I called him out eventually as a pumper. Like, this guy's basically a scam artist. He blocks my entire conversation, so I can't see him anymore, which, that's just any given day on the internet for me. Someone blocking me, that happens. But then a minute later, this review shows up on the Infomullet by Tom Nancy calling me a racist and all sorts of things. So it could be a coincidence, but I'm pretty sure it's him. And in honor of this Bitcoin pumper, I'm doing a special on Bitcoin electricity because it's been a topic for discussion, and it's come out because Tesla's made this big investment in Bitcoin, and it's raised the question of what is the trade-off consequence of Bitcoin from electricity consumption. Now, there's a lot of good questions that can come up with Bitcoin, and if people are interested, I'm happy to get into the discussion of fiat currency versus cryptocurrency, Fed inflation, privacy concerns, all of those things. But this one particularly, I'm going to stay fairly focused on Bitcoin. Oh, and if you have some Bitcoin, visit our store and buy some shirts. No. So I'm going to stay focused on the electrical consumption. So Bitcoin, the reason it's in the news from electricity consumption is there's this website. It's the University of Cambridge Bitcoin Electricity Consumption Index. It's a mouthful of a title, but it's only an acronym, and the link is below. Bitcoin is mined. So you think about paper currency. You make paper currency by printing it. Pretty simple process. And of course, these days, we make most of our dollar currency by going into an Excel sheet and adding a couple zeros. And, it's called, we just expand the monetary through the Fed. It's all digital. It's all virtual. None of it's really real, which is one of the reasons cryptocurrencies are popular, because the mining takes a tangible investment of resources, and it's a finite number of currencies. So that's all background. The resources for Bitcoin, it's computer-based processors, and that means electricity. And Bitcoin has now come on the radar as a large percentage, or a large consumer of electricity. Now, these numbers here are going to be put in context. First of all, total worldwide electricity production, 25,000 terawatts. So Bitcoin's just 0.5% of that overall. And these are 2016 numbers. So I think right now it's a little bit more closer to 8. Total, let's see here. Where am I looking at? Total, yeah, so Bitcoin's between 0.46 and 0.53 for energy consumption. And you can see this is around the world. It's the Bitcoin mining operations, because of the need for cheap, plentiful electricity, have begun diversifying. You used to do this in a computer, in a laptop in your basement. Not anymore. You need supercomputers now to be able to do this. And the reason why, and the reason this is important, goes to the core of Bitcoin itself. So if you're not familiar with Bitcoin's fundamental design, the way this mining works is there's an algorithm that you have to basically crack. And the difficulty of this algorithm to crack, and when you crack it, another Bitcoin gets produced. So you're basically doing computational password breaking. And it was set up years ago so that it would last for a long time and create a finite number of Bitcoins. But the key is each Bitcoin that is next mined is more difficult than the last one. So early on, it was very easy. You could do it with a laptop. Now it's basically high-end encryption breaking, and you need server farms to break this. And this doubling effect of this difficulty, this doubling effect of the algorithm created and my guess is an unanticipated consequence. This was started years ago. I mean, this has been going on for years, but now it's so hard. These server farms are needed, and you need tons of power because it's Bitcoin has hit the capacity of the processors. You cannot get faster processors to make Bitcoin easier to mine until we get to quantum computing. They have reached the limit of the processors, which means the only way now you can continue to mine Bitcoin and be effective and profitable is by adding more processors. So when you add processors in a server farm, there's a direct relation to the energy consumption. So if you think about it simply, you got a positive feedback loop. As the difficulty to mine Bitcoins doubles, the amount of processors you need to have doubles. I don't know if it's doubles, but it increases a lot. And therefore the electricity you need also doubles. And it's this doubling effect that has caused Bitcoin electricity to spread so fast in its expense. And you can look at this. Here we go. This is a Bitcoin right now, the energy usage in 2019. Every country here is listed top 30 energy users in the world. So what does that 0.5% mean? It doesn't sound like much. 0.5% of total worldwide energy is more than Argentina, right? You are Bitcoin. If Bitcoin were a country, it'd be in the top 30 countries for energy consumption. And this is just this last year, 2020, 67 terawatts of usage puts it above Argentina. Well, the key here is not the point in time. So a lot of people, when they talk about this electricity, and you're talking about global warming and where is this energy coming from and what is the economic value of Bitcoin? Now, we got to split economic value from investor value. Same thing when we talk about Wall Street. Wall Street is about investor value, doesn't necessarily mean economic value. The economic value I'm meaning is the net aggregate economic benefit of Bitcoin. I won't doubt that if you're trading Bitcoin, you can make lots of money. You can be gold, diamond hands, Daddy Musk, woo woo to the moon. But the economic value of Bitcoin is still very niche. But its energy consumption is the equivalent of the entire country of Argentina. So is the economic value that Bitcoin provides equivalent to Argentina? Maybe, maybe not. But arguing what it is right now misses where Bitcoin's going. And this is this positive feedback loop that I was talking about and got me in trouble with this pumper. It's when you have a positive feedback loop, you're talking compounding and exponential growth. And we can see that when we go to the actual dashboard for the Cambridge study, and it shows the consumption in terawatt hours by Bitcoin. So this is that University of Cambridge Business School. It's the Bitcoin Electricity Consumption Index. I recommend it. Their methodology is transparent. They got all sorts of this stuff. But you can look here. So this is 2016 when they start. Their estimated terawatt consumption is 2.23. And they've got an upper band, medium band, and a lower band. That's what these three numbers are: gray, orange, and yellow. I'm going to use the medium band, right? The medium estimate of consumption. So from 2016, right? February of 2016, here we go. Let's see. Yeah, so 5.7 to February of 2021, and these are updated every 30 seconds. The midpoint estimated consumption is 124 terawatts. That means in 5 years, the energy consumption of Bitcoin has doubled 5 times. That is the risk of Bitcoin consumption, electricity-wise, not where it is now and the percentage of what it is now, but that every year it seems to be doubling. In 5 years, it's doubled 5 times. If this doubles again, it's going to be 260 terawatt hours the next year and 520 after that. Now, things don't double forever. There's always limits, but that means, and for those that sounds familiar, that's what makes COVID-19 so dangerous. You can look at it at a point in time and say, oh, that's not that bad. That's only a limited percentage, but it's doubling, which means when you look at it next, it's going to be twice what it is. And this is why, you know, people ask, well, what is the US currency? What does it take to produce US currency? Well, I looked it up. And the US currency is, there's only 2 places that print currency. It's in Fort Worth, Texas, and Washington, D.C. Those 2 facilities combined, I think, use 53 kilowatt hours of energy. 53 kilowatt hours. Compared to terawatt hours, it's 0.01% of the Bitcoin energy is used to produce the paper currency. And the important thing is that it's not growing at a doubling rate. We print currency only to replace currency as it gets damaged or worn, or it goes out of circulation, it gets lost, we print more currency. And this is, a lot of people are arguing, well, other things are more or less or different. But the key thing is very few things have a doubling growth for long. And most of the established aspects out there don't have this doubling factor. So Bitcoin is right now slightly beneath the entire transportation sector worldwide electricity consumption. When it doubles, it will be over it. And the question is the economic benefit of Bitcoin more or less than all global transport worldwide? I'm going to say no. I'm just going to go on a limb here and say no. It doesn't mean that it's not a valid use to hedge against inflation or that there's valid anti-privacy things. And the reason why it does this is it's trapped into this cycle. This is not something that Bitcoin can avoid. You go back to that design, it was built to have every next coin be twice as hard, effectively, to mine as the last coin. And we've reached a point where we can't increase processors anymore. We can't double the processing computing power as well as we used to, which means we have to add more processors, which means we have to add more electricity. So the foreseeable future, Bitcoin's going to continue to consume energy. Now, there's other cryptocurrencies out there that are more recent and don't have this flaw. They're not as energy intensive. And I'm not going to get into a specific nuance. I don't trade, full disclosure, since we're talking financial things. I don't have any financial stake in any cryptocurrency or any commodity. The only thing I have is SPY, Spider Fortune 500 index funds, right? It's the most boring thing you can do. Dollar cost average over time. It's almost the effectiveness of a blind account, except it's not even as interesting as a blind account. I have no financial stake in this. I'm just looking at this as a system scientist and saying Bitcoin is going to continue because it's now $40,000, $50,000 a coin. That financial incentive remains, and a lot of people are chasing that. As they chase it, the percentage of energy that Bitcoin consumes of the entire worldwide electricity production continues to gobble more. And that leads to the development of new power sources, which may or may not be renewable or very carbon friendly or carbon mitigation friendly. And this is something that Bitcoin's going to have to address. If it wants to answer its promise as being the new currency for everything, well, you can't have a reserve currency that, to get it, continues to require a doubling of electricity. The US global currency doesn't consume. Now, once the currency is made, then it gets into the transaction. And we're not talking transaction or what it takes to manage the stock exchange or trade stock. That's already baked in. We're talking just what it takes to produce the currency itself. And that's where I think you're going to see a lot of articles on Bitcoin, and why the Bitcoin's going to struggle is, it may very well be a good investment. People who buy it may make money off of it. But as an economic thing, it's hard to justify a doubling of electricity consumption for an economic advantage that doesn't really feel like that. Wow, so let's go through some of the questions here. One Myanmar question: does Myanmar own the Andaman Islands? China would like to rent them, I'm sure, to control access to Bay of Bengal. I'll have to look into that, Mike. I'm not sure off the top of my head whether they control it. On to Bitcoin questions. Bonky Khan shills unite. Yeah, so Mike is pointing out that Bitcoin has pushed a surge in video cards because the video cards are good for mining. Video graphics cards themselves have processors in them. They're very specialized processor cards for high-end graphics that do a lot of numerical computation. Well, Bitcoin mining requires numerical computation. So video cards and they're energy hogs. They've got their own processor. They've got their own fans. You don't put a fan on something unless it's generating heat. It's not generating heat unless electricity is going through it. Lucas is asking, do other cryptocurrencies work similar to how Bitcoin does with regards to farming? As far as I know, the newer ones are different. And this is where I want to be careful, because I'm not an expert on Ethereum or Dogecoin and all. I think Dogecoin's a joke. I'm not sure. I'm going to probably find out in the comments that it's not the joke, but the most serious thing ever. But all these other coins, some of them I have heard are more eco-friendly because they took into account the design. I remember Bitcoin was designed in the early 2000s. It was designed 15 or so years ago. Some of the more recent cryptocurrencies, I think, have taken this into account, but I'm not going to guarantee that, Lucas. Yeah, Ed's mentioning that Bitcoin miners in Texas are going to have to spend a few Bitcoins on their power bill this month. Actually, Ed, most Bitcoin farmers in the US have moved literally to the place of power generation. So like the hydro dam in Eastern Washington, it's a very rural area on the Columbia River. This is the Columbia Basin. It's traditionally a farming area. They've had Bitcoin miners relocate their server farms right next to the power station. So, I don't know if they're building their Bitcoin server farms right outside the oil refineries, but I have a feeling they're going to be closer to producers of electricity and the power grids, not just necessarily the oils and stuff like that. Yeah, Ed is saying that Dodge and Erythium are better at some of the electricity consumption. I can't verify that myself. Mike's asking, cracking an algorithm, who is producing the encryption? So are lessons learned being gleaned from the encryption community? I don't think so. I think the algorithm is kind of one of these mathematical exercises where if you create a mathematical equation, I'm going to speak very broadly here because I don't want to get too far out on the ice that I'm going to fall through. But basically, you can talk about P versus NP problems, and some of those scale well for algorithms that once you solve them, they get very easy to solve. Some of them do not scale, and they continue to be harder and harder each time you add an increment. If you look up traveling salesman, that's an NP problem. It means that even though it doesn't seem like it should be that hard, it's insanely difficult to crack. So I'm not sure if this is getting into better encryption methods, or they're using the latest state-of-the-art encryption methods, and it may not even be encryption. I'm saying hacked. I'm using that word. That may be the wrong word. It may just be mathematical processing, a sheer number of computations, which creates an outer limit to what these processors can handle. Yeah, some are saying cancerous growth of energy consumption. That's the risk here. Yeah, Ed's pointing out that the algorithm was created when the coin was created. So this algorithm has been in place for years now. Satoshi is the one who's credited with it. Talking about the big push for CPOs is efficiency, the big push for GPUs is raw power. So, yeah, Ishmael's talking about high energy farms. I didn't realize Bitcoin would be so popular. I should talk about cryptocurrencies more often. Are cryptocurrency algorithms that are launched into civilization-wide economic calculation system and evolve as emergent entities? That's a mouthful. Let me read that again, Ian. Are cryptocurrency algorithms launched in a civilization-wide economic calculation system and evolve as emergency entities? I don't think there's so when we talk about emergence, and this is going a little bit into complex systems here, and I got to pause here to get to Iraq and Russia because they're burning too, but let's talk about Bitcoin first. When we use the phrase emergent is where you have a collection of small definable properties that when they begin interacting, create a property that is not reducible or discoverable back from the properties which combine to create it. So what an emergent property is you have something that itself cannot be easily discerned from the component parts that made it. The term synergy is greater than the sum of its part. Well, the term emergent means non-detectable from the decomposition of its parts. And so something that has an emergent property, you can use an example here that I use a lot. There is the concept of the military, right? The US military, the component parts are soldiers, US soldiers, uniforms, tactics, TTP. You can break it down into many, many different parts. But the way those parts interact create something about the US military that itself is not reducible down to any one of those parts. And it's in how you can tell the difference between the French military and the US military and the Canadian military and the Myanmar military. These are distinct emergent properties that have emerged, and complex adaptive systems are famous for creating these emergent properties. The cryptocurrencies, as I understand it, are not emergent. We know the property that's going to be of this mathematical calculation. We know it's going to be complicated in the future, more complicated than it is, but it's not going to have an emergent property from the cryptocurrency itself. The mining is still going to be how many processors you can throw, how efficient, how much raw power to do these calculations. That is a known quantity. There is nothing emergent from it. But when cryptocurrencies get released into a human system like the economy, everything in the economy is an emergent system, right? Complex adaptive systems, that's the definition of human activity, especially economies. The release of the cryptocurrency will have emergent properties, and this is where we talk about unforeseen consequences and unanticipated consequences, is sometimes these emergent properties, which you cannot detect from the component parts, end up really biting you in the butt. And so that may be, and some of them may be very beneficial. You never know. That's the trick with emergent. And emergence, another way to think of emergence is if you stand right now at the present and look forward, you cannot tell what the future is going to hold. But if you stand in the future and look back, you can trace all the individual things that happened along the way. The fact that we're talking about Bitcoin and not Bobcoin is an emergent property that of all the innovations of with cryptocurrency, the Satoshi one happened to be the one that got picked up. You can go back in 2000 and you would find people talking about these cryptocurrencies and stuff like that, but this one happened to have the right combination and it emerged. And it's, you could go back and look and see, well, it seems very clear, but if you were standing at 2000 and say, what would be the dominant cryptocurrency in 2021? No one could predict Bitcoin and they might not even be aware of this electrical consumption problem. These are the emergent properties of the cryptocurrency within the system, but the cryptocurrency itself, the mining, I don't see that as it's a complicated system, but not a complex system. And Mike's asking, at some point, are there no more Bitcoins to be earned? This is true. There is a finite limit to the number of Bitcoins determined when the algorithm was put in place, and that's why it is a hedge against a fiat currency. Its theory is it's like gold. There's a finite number of gold in the world, though that's a bad thing to bet on because there's always finding more gold. But Bitcoin was designed from the beginning to have a finite number of coins that could ever be mined. And once you hit that, that's the limit. There's no more coins available. And what you're using then is smaller and smaller decimal fractions of existing coins to divide and make transactions. So I'm going to pause here because I want to get to Russia and Iraq. From Bitcoin to Russia and Iraq, that's one of the lovely jumps we do here on the Info Moment while my brain is mush at the end of this. So jumping over to Russia. For those of you who watched, I did release 2 mega mullets on foreign affairs in January. Maybe it was January and February. I don't know. One was on Iraq, one was on Russia. And with Russia, what's going on is there's these protests that have gone on that have been occurring in the last, so February 2nd is I did the mega mullet. That was the second weekend of protest. And what it is if you remember back over the summer, I talked about the Russian constitution was being passed with some 2020 changes that basically made Vladimir Putin be able to run for more offices. He could be in power until 2036. When he leaves power, he can't be prosecuted. All the state power comes under him. Opposing that constitutional referendum last year was someone named Navalny, who is a blogger that has also been, like, he ran for mayor. He's been a very successful blogger. He's run on a platform of anti-corruption, and he targeted those constitutional changes, calling the United Party of the Russian United Party crooks, criminals. He really went after it hard in July. And, as they say in Russian, the poisoned well is brought to you. So he goes after this, and he's been around since 2012. But in August, he was caught up by the FSB, caught him up, and he got a visit from the nerve agent ferry in August of 22. He was on a flight, fell rapidly ill. They had to emergency land, and he was damn lucky that there was an ambulance that was, the ambulance had crew that knew what to do, just got lucky. They put him in the ambulance. They were able to stabilize him. Very quickly, he fled the countries, basically, in a coma to Germany, where they could treat this. And he was in Germany then, and because he was, quote unquote, under arrest or on bail or something like that, the Russians are saying, well, he illegally fled the country after he was in a coma when they poisoned him. So in January, he does a kind of a smooth move. He basically releases this big video showing Putin's palace and all his wealth. And this is important. A lot of people in the West portray Vladimir as the strong man, authoritarian dictator. That kind of plays well in Russia. They like their strong men, so that's not hurting him. Navalny attacks Putin by showing him as corrupt, weak, just another fat, slobby criminal who's just feeding off the people. So this palace is like showing he's like the czar, right? He's just luxury and decadence and all that. And that really hit a bone. He also got a phone interview with one of the chemical experts that's in this FSB team that poisoned him, pretending he was a security official, getting this guy to admit that they poisoned him. So he has these video cues while he's in Germany in the hospital. He puts these out in December. No one's paying attention. He comes back in the country in January. Total surprise in late January. He re-enters the country. The Russians only found out minutes before his plane was going to land in Moscow. And at the last minute, they divert his plane, get it going to a smaller airport so they won't have this big hero's welcome. They immediately arrest him on landing. He doesn't even make it through passport control. They arrest him, they put him in jail, and then begin the protests. And for those who have watched before, this diagram is familiar. Navalny has put Putin on the dictator's dilemma. And the dictator's dilemma is an asymmetric tactic. It's not a conventional tactic. It's different than Myanmar, but it starts with this battling for governing institutions. So over here is the fight, and red is the dictator, green is the protesters. Who has more power? They're calling for reforms to be made. This is the call for fair elections, constitutional reforms. The dictator refuses to give power. They refuse to compromise, so there's a growth of grievances that happen. And then we go over here and we go to the battle for the streets, the arms race. These are the actual horns of the dilemma, that as the vibrancy of protests, the authorities fear losing control. They escalate crackdown measures. That increases the severity of crackdown. That reduces the vibrancy of protests, which then the protesters fear loss of liberties. They escalate the resistance measure. That increases the severity of resistance, and that affects the vibrancy of protest. And by the way, the severity of crackdown accumulates unmet demands. And so what happened here is over the 2 weekends, and I watched this for 2 weekends, this was happening. If you missed this, I don't blame you. It's happening right as we were getting ready for the Senate trial and during the Senate trial. And during these, you had mass protests. Now, there's been protests in Moscow before. This is not Putin's first rodeo ride with the dictator's dilemma. But what's different is Navalny was able to, using social media, he was to make it very widespread. Traditional protests in Russia against Putin, they're usually centered in Moscow. They're usually more of the elite, cosmopolitan. This guy's got a huge following across a very diverse scale. You had protests in far east Siberia, far northern Russia, all sorts of demographics and socioeconomic backgrounds, and that's why Putin is now taking this guy as a threat. So if you think about Russia, you can divide Russia into 3 groups. There's 2 minority states, both have about 30% popularity. One of those is hardcore supporters of Putin. They're ride or die with Putin. They're going with them. They're 100% behind him. That's 30%. The opposition, Navalny, has 30%, right? So, maybe 25, 30%. Neither of them have a majority. In the middle is this much larger block. They're fairly apolitical, and it's a group that's engaging in what's called calculated legitimacy. Calculated legitimacy is a group that says, we don't necessarily agree with Putin, but for our own strategic interest, we're going to align with them. And where they go, Russia goes. So the fight right now is over that middle calculate. So Myanmar, this is a mass mobilization. The entire society is coming out. What's happening in Russia is you have the authorities and Navalny maneuvering around each other with these protests to try and sway that middle block. And if they can sway the middle block, the thought is that might lead to a collapse. Now, a collapse in Russia is not a collapse like you see in the Arab Spring or something like that. It's going to be much closer to a Soviet Union style collapse, a fracturing of the elites. The elites that support Putin are oligarchs, powerful people in the military, the intelligence services. When he put in place this constitution, he banned some of those oligarchs from ever running for office. So some of the oligarchs have a knife to grind, and they're using Navalny. There's a suspicion that they're using Navalny, and they're kind of backing him to keep him popular. Now, it's key to know that Navalny himself, in the West, we tend to say, wow, it's a little guy going up against a dictator, great guy, good. Navalny himself, the jury's still out. He's more of a populist nationalist than he is a Boy Scout carrying, Western liberal. So you got to be careful here. It's less that you're seeing, it's not like a progressive versus a conservative. It's more like a little less to the right conservative against a really far to the right conservative. So there's some question about what Navalny's nationalism. He's anti-immigration. He tends to be xenophobic. In some of his statements in the past, these questions have come up. He says he's turned a corner. If he's going to mass, the question is he trying to play to this base to get support there to mobilize? Is that his true beliefs himself? So you got to be careful that having Navalny come in over Putin may not in itself be a great thing. We don't know what his governing style is going to be, but he's pushing for fair elections. That's his main goal. It's hard to argue with that. And as these crackdowns, you would see these pictures come out where the Russia would crack down, and it's shifted the conversation from what Navalny's politics are to the oppression of the Putin regime, which is exactly what you want to do in the dictator's dilemma. Whatever the original argument is, that's the original ideological argument, when you force the dictator to crack down on you violently, then the violence becomes a discussion. And you've seen the dictator's dilemma. I've shown it before in the Battle of Lafayette Square. I've shown it in Hong Kong. I've shown it a couple times, and it's whenever you have violence in a situation, it tends to erase the differences other than you were violent towards me or you weren't. And this is also a crucial time for Putin. He used to be, Putin dominated 21st century politics up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And at that point, he's kind of now the sick man of Eurasia. And you can see that in, he's gone up against Turkey 3 times and lost. Turkey used to be an ally of Putin. Now Erdogan's like, I don't need you. There's been 3 proxy wars. Russia behind Putin has lost all 3: Libya, Armenia versus Azerbaijan, and Syria, where Turkey carved out a huge swath. Russia's been on the losing end. Their mercenary group, the Wagner group, is having a hard time exerting itself. This is kind of like the Blackwater of Putin. They would use this mercenary group to intervene in Mozambique and other areas and have plausible deniability. This group has a losing streak that would put the Jaguars to shame. So they're not doing great. And, the economy is not doing well in Russia. The ruble's got mass inflation. Kleptocratic regimes like Putin's, where they're basically enriching themselves, they tend not to do well. They had this oil shock where Saudi Arabia punched them in the nose, gave them a bloody nose with the oil shock, where for a bit there, oil went negative in price. They didn't fare well on that. But let's be clear, these protests are kind of the opening and not the end game. They're already morphing in style. That dictator's dilemma, where they're innovating their resistance measures. The latest, every weekend they're doing this new kind of protest. The latest was to hold up your cell phones as flashlights. And it's amusing how this works. Navalny's pretty savvy here. He spread this wide, hold up your cell phones as flashlight. And everyone's like, oh, that's a dumb protest. What's that going to mean? And, some people did it, but not a lot. But Putin flipped. The Russian media, because the Russian state media, the television, is a monopoly controlled by the government. They went all out. Do not put your cell phones on flashlight. Do not use flash. I mean, they overreacted. And that kind of was the point. It wasn't necessarily, it's a way of tweaking the dictator without risking your supporters every week to get arrested. The goal here is the parliamentary elections that are coming up in 2021. By September 2021, there's got to be new parliamentary elections for the Duma. That's where Navalny's aiming. He wants to put in place reforms and get as many people elected in that Duma as possible. Now, even then, they won't have much power because of this new constitution, but they'll at least have some piece of the Duma. And if that's the case, the guess is that Navalny is going to run against Putin in the next presidential election, which comes up 2024, I think. So that's the background on Russia. Let me check to see if there are. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so if there's questions on Russia, ask them. I'm going to hop to Iraq very quickly so I can finish this off. It's a 2-hour info mullet. This is this is a long one. And a part of this is catching up. We had the insurrection, the impeachment, and the trial. That took a lot of attention. But these are important things that are happening internationally. Last but certainly not least, Iraq. So where's my map of Iraq? There we go. All right. Let me organize myself here. If you haven't yet and you like this kind of stuff, support us, the Info Mullet, on Patreon. We appreciate all the support. www.patreon.com/infomullet. You can go to our store and let me actually, while I'm doing this, here we go. We'll do this all again. We'll make this look clean in the editing. All right, so here is Iraq. All right, so here's Iraq. So remember, the last time we did an international update was in January 20th of 2021. And right, so the day after that, ISIS bombed Baghdad, central Baghdad. So here we go. Bomb Baghdad, central Baghdad. And this one caught my eye because I've done a lot of work on ISIS. I've done simulations on ISIS. I've consulted with the DoD on ISIS. I did a lot of counter ISIS stuff in the 2014 through 2018. In fact, my master's of science is insurgency dynamics and simulation science because of the ISIS simulations I built. But this bombing occurred here in Baghdad. And what immediately struck me is it was in a particular market square. And it was a two suicide bomber, complex attack. First bomber lured in people by pretending he was sick. People came to his aid. He blew himself up. Then the second bomber blew himself off when the aid workers came in to help the people from the first bomb. And so this attack is actually similar to an attack that was held in 2018. And what's important about that, that attack in 2018 was the last attack that ISIS was able to pull off in Baghdad. They had almost exactly the same casualties, 30 to 50 people killed, several hundred wounded, and it was literally within days of each other, January 28th to 21st or something like that. This is a symbolic return of ISIS in Iraq. And I've talked about the forecast. Mike's asked some good Ask Me Anything forecast for the New Year's Eve. I've talked for years how ISIS is coming back as an insurgency. And this bombing, I think, was a symbolic to put themselves back on the map, because what's coming up here in the upcoming year in Iraq is a key fulcrum point, which may lead to the partition or collapse of Iraq, which I've described before. So again, to orient those who are unfamiliar, southern Iraq here, right up to Baghdad, this is primarily Arab Shia area. You have the Sunni triangle here. This is largely going to be Sunni Arab. And then you have up north here, you have the Kurdish area. And the traditional conflict is the Sunni Arabs were supporters of Saddam. They suppressed the Kurds and the Shias. We had no-fly zones in the top half and the bottom part here for years under the Clinton, Bush regimes. Then we invaded Iraq under Bush. We overthrew Iraq, and then began the massive insurgency, which was largely Sunni Arab-based in this area, not as much in the Kurdish area. When we left Iraq in 2011, there was Shia were beginning to overtake Sunni Arabs for political power in Iraq. They were influenced. This is Iran over here to the east. They were coming into Iran, and you began suppressing the Sunni Arabs. The Shia majority began suppressing the Sunni Arabs. That led to grievances, which enabled the rise of ISIS. ISIS began by taking Fallujah and Ramadi in late 2013, 2014. Then they kicked off a huge Anbar offensive and took all the way up to Mosul, almost got Erbil, took Kirkuk, all of this huge area, all the way to the border of Syria and into Syria. So we know what happened there. We gradually pushed them back. They were defeated territorially in 2017, and that's why that last bombing in 2018 was significant. That was the last time ISIS was able to conduct a complex attack inside Baghdad in the last 3-4 years. So fast forward, the situation has gone it's continuing to destabilize. Iran, the popular mobilization committees, these are private militias that were formed by Iran to fight ISIS, never gave up their arms. They continue to be formed. They're not under the power of the central state. They tend to report more to Iran than to Iraq. They have a lot of power and a lot of political support. You still have the Kurds. The Iraqs forced the Kurds out of Kirkuk, which the Kurds had taken fighting ISIS, and they said, hey, thanks for that. They got kicked out in Erbil. And you had this uprising that began in, I called it the New Arab Street. The younger demographics, Kurdish, Sunni Arab, and Sunni Shia, they began to reject the older generation's political divisions and began to call for new elections, new government. They weren't aligned with any existing power block. And this was very unusual in Iraq. Began in 2019, was very violent, continued through 2020. You had a lot of violence with the PMCs fighting these protesters. And some of these locations here, Basra is one of the hearts of these protests. So instead of being in the Sunni triangle, these mass popular protests, Basra, Nazira, Najaf, the main key Shia cities are where these protests are the loudest. During that time, up in the Kurdish areas, you had the lingering forces of the Kurdish. So the Kurdistan, you have, let me make sure I'm getting these names right. You have the KDP is the Kurdistan Democratic Party. They're the largest political force in Kurdistan, and the PUK is the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. So the KDP and the PUK are the two groups that control the large bulk up here. There's a lot of oil up here. They control the Peshmerga. They've traditionally been U.S. allies. Then in fighting ISIS, this group called the YPJ, which was the People's Defensive Groups, the People's Protection Units, began forming in this northern swath of Syria. East of, this is the, I think this is the Euphrates River here. East of this, they begin forming in this arc up here. This was where Kurdish Syria holding was, and it's the YPJ. Now the trick is the YPJ did have some associations early on in cross membership with the PKK. Hold your hats. That is the Kurdistan's Workers' Party, which is an outlawed terrorist group in southern Turkey and northern Kurdistan. It is a you can call it Marxist, communist if you want. Sort of that's their ideological. They're fighting for autonomous regions, for Kurdish autonomous regions in Turkey. There's been a long-running insurgency. Turkey does not like this group at all, and it has caused Turkey to intervene into northern Iraq. So Turkish currently has an intervention against the PKK in northern Iraq, and they are being supported by the KDP and the PUK in northern Iraq. So you got Kurdish conflict going up here. You have Shia conflict going down here, fracturing between the PMCs and the younger generation. You have ISIS rising again in the middle. This is all coming to a head, not by any accident. In June of this year, 2021, Iraq is supposed to have the first parliamentary election since 2018. This is where you literally redraw the political map, and everyone is positioning themselves, ISIS, the PMCs, the students, the younger demographics, Turkey, Kurdish, they're all positioning themselves for this election because whoever wins this is going to be able to call the shots going forward. And ISIS, I think, is trying to time it. Those elections are timed for June. And the current prime minister, his only job is to secure those elections and hold them fair. He may not be able to do it. He may push them off till later. They may not happen until September. But June is going to be the high-risk month. When you're watching Iraq, watch in June for several reasons. One, the parliamentary elections are there. That's the key crisis point that's going to cause, if there's a collapse of Iraq this year, it's going to happen around those elections. Second, Ramadan falls in June. And Ramadan is traditionally, it's a Muslim holiday, holy month, but ISIS has used it to launch provocative attacks. Ramadan is their favorite month for an offense. They do it to often attack Muslims during the holy month. It's a very apostate kind of dick move to do, but that's ISIS for you. And it's also the anniversary of the Anbar offensive that I described in 2014. It's the 7th year anniversary in June of the launch of the Anbar offensive, and they took Mosul in June, and that's when they declared themselves a caliphate. So this June, I don't get into numerology, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of stuff being crammed into June of this month in Iraq, and all of these moving pieces are coming together in this parliamentary elections where everyone's going to be fighting for power. The way ISIS usually operates, they're not that powerful in Iraq right now. They're an insurgency, but they're nowhere near as powerful as they used to be. They're still dangerous, but the way they advance themselves is to divide everyone else and make everyone else smaller versus ISIS. And that's how they create instability. They don't have to be the largest group. If the entire, what they're opposing falls apart into smaller factions, they just have to be more powerful than any one of those factions, and they can carve out another spot for themselves. So that's the key thing to watch going forward in Iraq with the instability, is these June elections that happen to fall right on this trifecta of, you've got conflict between Shia Arabs and their demographics. You've got conflict with Kurdish and the Turkish intervention. You've got ISIS coming back. They're seeing it as the anniversary of their Ramadan or their Anbar offensive, where they declared themselves a caliphate. I kind of hope they push the elections back and get it off that month to give them more chance to create security, more chance to create good conditions for fair elections. But even moving the elections at this point is politically fraught because it's been so long and it's been fought for. So that's a dangerous move to do too. But that's the main risk for instability in Iraq in the coming year. And again, all these links are below if you want to take a look at them. I appreciate everyone coming out today. It's been a long info mullet. Hopefully we're all caught up now with international affairs. We can go back to our normal. If you haven't, check us out on Twitter, like and share, follow us on Facebook, subscribe and share on the YouTube. This video will be up in full episode on Friday. I'll be doing the segments after that. Visit our store, buy some merchandise. We appreciate that because it gets us a little, you get some swag, we get some support, or check us out on the Patreon, patreon.com/infomullet. These are all the places you can find. We're going to go back to our regular schedule. We did 3 of these in a row because we had the special edition for the trial, but we're back to our regular schedule in March. First Wednesday of the month is domestic affairs, U.S. domestic issues. Third Wednesday is COVID-19 and international affairs. But there's going to be lots of domestic stuff going on. Biden's agenda is coming fast and furious. Probably bad choice of words on my part, unintentional throwback there. But there's going to be the lingering outcomes of the trial that happened. We'll cover all that in the domestic. That's going to be the first Wednesday. And then I'm going to take a break because Lord knows I need one. And hopefully the world won't have blown up quite as bad, knock on wood, by mid-March. And the third Wednesday in the March will be a more tame. Usually these are about an hour, but I had to do 2 hours today to cover all this stuff. So I appreciate all the support that people are giving, everyone who stayed tuned and watched. I know it was a long one. And if you have to go outside, wear a mask. Otherwise, stay safe because COVID is still very dangerous. Everyone take care. Goodbye. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the InfoMullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the InfoMullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.